Hey YouTube, Tyler here, and I am doing this quick introduction before this video because it's a departure from the type of videos I normally do. I just want to encourage you all to do what I'm about to do here. Have conversations with people who don't agree with you. I have a conversation with a friend of mine who uh, has some views that he considers to be the opposite of mine. So I encourage you all to do the same thing. You certainly will not agree with everyone, and if you keep shunning people that you have disagreements with, or blocking people on Facebook for having an opinion that you don't like, pretty soon you'll end up on an island. And it's never too late to change your habits. Another great thing too with conversations like this, people start to see comparisons of philosophies. You will probably see a comparison of libertarianism and his point of view, which is very different. And yeah, you may find things wrong with what I said or with what he said. Either way, keep it cordial. Um, be constructive. Don't name call. Don't be a jerk. You're allowed to be, but you suck if you're a jerk. No, you don't suck, but no one likes jerks. It's your right to be a jerk. Anyway, I'm rambling. Enjoy this very long conversation, or if you're watching the follow-up video, which I'll put this beforehand too, enjoy his perspective. And alright, YouTube, we're back. If you watched the first video, that was a hour and a half, maybe closer to 2 hours, long discussion on our views on the world and how to make it work more efficiently. And Victor had the great idea. I'm sorry, you cool with your name being presented?
Sure.
Okay.
You can call me Victor.
Okay, Victor.
But nothing else.
Okay.
No more.
Yeah, Victor was very intelligent with his idea of let's make it into 2 videos because we're already long and this is an important subject.
I am very intelligent, thank you.
Doesn't he look it? Let me just jump right into it. We left off. We wanted to ask you about why did the just communist idea fail?
Mm-hmm.
Just to start out with, because you mentioned Russia had some mob ties, so why did that fail?
Sure. Man, okay, so let's start with this idea of history kind of repeats itself. So what we see throughout history is the same thing, which is authoritarian power, or authoritarians coming into power and then being crushed by the people. The people will then try to rebuild, and then slowly the power accumulates back into like one central thing, and then that comes into power, and then it gets crushed again. So when you look at that, what you have to see is, yes, there was a good idea in those times where Karl Marx came up with this scientific way to look at how, like, if people just gather their resources together, they can actually have true power, and we can document that and use it as a blueprint to create what is a lot of people call communism, but there's different forms of it. And so at the time in Russia, there was a Tsar, and of course, although he was actually a fairly intelligent human being who imported a lot of culture into Russia, there was still so much poverty, and people were just too smart to be oppressed, and there came a point where they wanted to break free of those chains, and they had this blueprint on how to do that. They attempted to do that. In the process, what happened was co-optation, which means you have somebody who's actually trying to do something good, but other sources can't come in that have vested interest, and they pull that person's decision-making ability into a different direction. And so that turning point was around the time where Lenin was doing his thing. He was sort of like the Obama of his time, where he wasn't the perfect candidate, but he was much better than, the other candidates. And so he was trying to balance, like, keeping the people happy while keeping all these power hungry players, at least at bay. Unfortunately, Stalin took over after him, who was fully corrupted, and from then on, communism didn't stand a chance. It was never communism as soon as Stalin came into power. It was authoritarianism disguised as communism. They were abusing the workers in the sense that these workers were generating things for the government for free, but never getting the retribution for it. And it was under the guise of like a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan that there would be a transition into communism, but that transition never came. Those people's labor was essentially free labor to Stalin, the way that, the Germans gave free labor to Hitler when he was in power. And so as this quote unquote communism in Russia was progressing after Stalin, it was just transforming and manifesting and evolving into different types of oppressive regimes. And eventually in the 90s it crumbled because it was such a false, fake communism that the players involved who had the power were easily corrupted by capitalism and fell right away. They were like, yeah, I want money. There's no integrity in the system.
Oh, I think part of it is they didn't have it until that point. You think if in that 5 to 10 year plan, if they were being paid, it wouldn't crumble like that?
Who was being paid?
Oh, like the people providing, the farmers providing the goods.
No, those people were totally committed to the whole situation. They wanted to see the transformation. That their understanding of it was that if we put our labor in, it will pay off in dividends later, and our kids can have a brighter future.
Wow.
But what happened was, it just kept getting pushed further down the line. But while the people were kept in poverty and forced to continue to generate, labor, so that they were told, like, your civilization has to keep moving forward. Do you want your fellow man to starve? Keep working, keep working.
Yeah. So to touch on this really quick, and I'll toss it back to you in a sec. But that's part of why I'm a libertarian. I think all central forms of power, especially government, is corruptible. And I think even if that did get off the ground, it would be a forever corruptible system. But what changed? How could it succeed? How could it have worked?
Well, imagine if in our current election that just happened, if the Democratic primary wasn't rigged and Bernie Sanders came into power. Perhaps we'd have a better democracy today. And so that's what similar concept to what was happening around the time where Lenin was trying to make this whole communism thing work. He was squashed, and instead of these authoritarians came in. If his vision was allowed to flourish, or even better, people like Trotsky, the people that came before Lenin, who were actually doing things by the book instead of doing things, for themselves, if their ideas were actually allowed to work, I believe that they would work. They would not be perfect, and it would take time for people to adjust to it. It would take time for us to actually find the flaws in the practical execution of that plan, but I do believe that it will work.
So, part of, I think, is a flaw within communism is there's a spectrum of people. Like there are really good people who are really dedicated and really want to make a better future for their children, and there are really sucky people. And part of the incentive in a free market capitalist society is if you aren't productive, you aren't successful. So it's a financial incentive towards production. How would a communist society incentivize people to work?
Sure. So I do want to answer that, but I think you're kind of hinting at something, which is that ultimately something like communism is forever corruptible because there's just bad people in the world, and they're going to mess it up. They're going to throw sticks into the gears and break it just to see it break. And is that true?
Yeah, I did allude to that. I think it's important to highlight this, and you can shoot it down if you want. But I think, in my opinion, the danger of communism is it requires some form of authoritarianism for it to be enacted. Meaning, if everything is in control of one centralized source, that centralized source is corruptible, and there's no safety net underneath it. I think we're seeing it right now in Venezuela. They got pretty close to communism with how high the taxes were, and then all of a sudden the food supply dries up through government pulling back of it, and now what you're seeing is like pamphlets being handed out, like "Don't eat your dogs. It's not right" type of thing. So how does it prevent the authoritarianism, and how does it work? How does it incentivize people?
Well, so there's a couple things that there is to address. Venezuela, I could tell you a lot about that and why you're wrong, but let me just answer your question, which is how do we prevent authoritarianism and communism, and how does the whole thing work? So I think people have a very simplistic perspective on communism, and it's almost like a willful misunderstanding, or I should say not understanding.
It's a willful ignorance.
A willful ignorance of communism, because there's sort of a stigma around it. But you have to understand that nothing is as simple as it seems. So just because communism has this straightforward concept of every single person owns an equal share of everything, that doesn't mean that's where it stops. So in terms of how do you prevent authoritarianism, there is some authoritarian type of I guess laws or something in the transitional part of communism, where we transition out of our system into communism, where you have to tell people hey guys, okay, we have to stop doing this, and that in itself is authoritarian. But it's not
centralized. It's like the community policing itself. Similar, you mean? Who's telling them, hey guys, you can't be doing this?
Well, yeah. So ideally, it would be other people from within the community. But the way that it was in the USSR and Russia, it was there was a person chosen to be in control, Lenin, to guide us through the transition into communism. I lost my train of thought, but so how do we prevent authoritarian power in communism? Well, it's kind of what I was saying earlier, where you have transparency, you have correct information distributed to all the people so they can make the right decisions. That will prevent co-opting, where you think somebody's here to help you, but they're actually giving you money to screw you over or screw somebody else over, but you don't really know that because they're not telling you that. So extreme transparency, as long as everybody's informed on what's going on, it shouldn't be a big problem. And especially when people actually want this to happen on all levels, when they see the end goal, just like when you're running you're doing the rowboat thing, that they do at Stanford. You have to work as a team. If people have the end goal in mind, there won't be there'll be so much more incentive to not allow things to break the system. But in the case of Russia, there were poor people who lived in far off villages that didn't understand that the person who they thought was a communist was not a communist, or there's so many problems that they just weren't educated about, they didn't understand.
Well, plus there was centralized power punishing people for not doing their part.
Sure, there was so many problems. So here, if we were to try and do it again, you've got your transparency, you've got people seeing what the end goal is clearly and understanding what it takes to get there, and it's sort of you have to kind of find that way to communicate with your community, get them on board, and then infiltrators will be quite obvious because they're not trying to get to the place that everyone has agreed on is the right place.
Yeah, so my concern is right now, like you mentioned inequity within money, but I think money is an equalizer because if you don't produce, you don't survive. Survival of the fittest type of way. But in a communist society, what happens if you aren't a contributing member of that communist society?
So another misconception is that for some reason, everyone's going to just kick back on the couch and eat potato chips, because why would you not, since you get free money? Hey, the reality is, I don't think people think that way. I think we should really feel sorry for those people who are so self-involved and miseducated that they think sitting on the couch is the thing to do. I think most people, when given the opportunity to do anything they want, will do something that makes them feel fulfilled. If I was in that situation, I would want to be, the best rocket scientist, because no longer am I limited by how much money I have to spend on a university to get the right degree. I don't have to brown nose anybody at my company to get promoted so that I would be allowed to make a decision that's actually helpful to the world. I would just be allowed to be helpful to the world, and I would want to be the best at it. And I think a lot of other people would say the same thing, like whether it's Einstein or anybody else, once they reach that certain level, they're just happy to be contributing, and they don't care if they get paid $25 an hour or $1,000 a minute.
Actualizing. I think another issue you raised too is, unfortunately, not everyone can be a rocket scientist.
Sure.
How do you combat that?
Well, so what you're saying is not that everyone can't be a rocket scientist, but that somebody has to be the janitor.
Right.
And if everybody's a rocket scientist, who's going to be the janitor? Well, my answer to that is automation is one looming thing that we have coming. All these tasks that we don't want to do will be done by some machine or something. So that's going to be a huge part of alleviating that problem. But there will still be some things that people don't want to do, but we need people to do. And I think that's where sort of a cultural change has to happen. We don't value certain jobs for some reason, while we value other jobs like they're the most important thing, like brain surgery, which actually happens to be the least difficult in terms of like how much you have to study for, as we found out with Ben Carson, that brain surgery is actually the easiest in terms of like how much work you have to do in the university to become a brain surgeon.
As compared to all other surgeries?
Yes, as compared to all other surgeries. So, like right now in our system, we underpay teachers, even though they're so important, because like everything we've been talking about is about the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the people that are with our kids all day get paid like $30,000
by the
government to live in the Bay Area, where $30,000 is below poverty.
Mm-hmm.
You can't rent an apartment for that amount.
Definitely not. To support what you were saying earlier, Japan does something really cool, where none of the schools have custodians.
Yes, I know about
I
this.
love that. None of the schools have custodians, so the kids clean up everything
Mm-hmm.
as part of their education.
Yeah, and there's no stigma around being janitor, because we all share the responsibility, and maybe that's something that communism could take a page from, is there's certain jobs that can be done by multiple people instead of just one person.
Right. And in European countries too. Some more socialist than others, but in Germany, great example, there's no stigma around going to trade schools.
Right.
And that's how they make the best cars in the world by many people's opinions, is there's a lot of people interested in building cars.
That's a great analogy for what I'm talking about, yeah.
Yeah. The problem I'm seeing though is who decides what people make? Like, who is the person who makes the decision that you have this job, therefore you make this amount of money?
Well, there's no money, right? So
this is the society you had in mind without money. So how are people rewarded for their work?
They're rewarded through the personal growth and the personal value that you intake from doing a great job and being sort of the best. If you want to compete with yourself or your fellow coworker, being this, pushing technology to its limits, inventing the next greatest thing, that's the reward you take home.
Okay. What about food production? That all comes from the state?
Yes.
Okay.
So how does that happen?
Yeah.
It's what I was hinting at before with the whole scientific stations throughout all these natural places. Is it has similar thing with the food system, where we account for everything we have. How many people do we have that need to be fed? How much land do we have? How many nutrients are in that soil? Where is that land located, and how close are the people to that land, so we can most efficiently grow the right amount of food in the right places to minimize transportation and minimize time wasted between harvest and bringing that food onto the table. We use a system like that to account for all of that, and we use the most conservative, most minimal amount of effort and resources to generate all that food.
Mm-hmm.
And we can easily feed everybody.
So, two questions that are raised. First question is, where does all the material come from on the global market? Like, as of right now, you're the first country that doesn't use money anymore. How do you trade with other countries?
Sure. So, it's a big challenge what you're talking about, where you're surrounded by capitalism and you're trying to be the one communist country. And I almost hesitate to call it communism, because it's so much evolved. Like, during the time that communism came into being, that's like 1800s, late 1800s, Karl Marx didn't have to deal with high-tech computers, artificial intelligence, anything like that. So this idea that we're dealing with now, what I like to call is a technocracy, or like a technological democracy, but essentially it's communism. So how do we do that? So we can look at history, what has worked and what hasn't worked.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what? Cuba is an example of this. How did they try to build communism when everybody around them was capitalist, and they were
sanctioned?
They were sanctioned by us, but they were surrounded by the U.S., the greatest capitalist force. Well, they did what they could to sort of preserve themselves and keep that competitive, I would call it like a virus or something, this competitive virus from getting into their country, so that people wouldn't start to like step on each other because they think they can get a little extra something. I think, sorry, going back to your question, was it how do you trade with other countries?
Yeah.
Or
Well, you need the material to build
okay.
this stuff.
How do you get access to resources outside of your land?
Mm-hmm.
That's tough, right? Because to truly be communist, you cannot have money, and all this other country wants is money. Maybe they want your resources too. So that if you can offer them resources, that's okay because you're not changing what you're doing. But in order to do that, you have to make sure it's sustainable, and that's where this whole thing about making absolute confidence about like what resources you do have in your little area of land could be as large as Russia, it could be like the size of Cuba. Let's take Cuba because it's small. So you get all your resources, you figure out what are the resources that are renewable and what do we need to do to make them renewable and how do we get that in motion. Once that's in motion, you can then export those resources to other countries and trade for things that you need. Ultimately, though, the goal is to have everybody on the same page, and then nobody has to fight each other for resources. We all deliver what we need to each other because we only use renewable resources. We don't deplete the earth.
So, part of the problem though is like money was invented because way back in the beginning of civilization, I as an individual only had these things to trade, and you as an individual only had those things to trade.
Mm-hmm.
Say I want an apple pie, and I really want this apple pie of yours. I'm going to offer you something to get that apple pie, but I don't have anything that you want, so you get to keep the apple pie. What alleviates that for, say, you're a country the size of Cuba, and that can trade with other countries? How do you develop this neotopia of a society,
Sure.
techocracy, when you can't when you don't have currency?
That's not a difficult problem. One thing you could just look to other countries and maybe, I don't have anything, or you don't have anything that I want, but you could talk to China and they might have something I want. You give them something they want. They give me something I want, and I give you something you want. Also, it is an issue, but then maybe the communist country has to reflect back on itself and realize, well, what can we do? Maybe we have to go without whatever it is that we're trying to get. Can we get around it? In the communism, there's a common phrase called seizing the means of production. Means you make your own stuff. You don't let other companies or countries make it. You make it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So you create your factories, you create your own food, you create your own fuel. What else do you really need from the outside that's not friendly to what you're trying to do?
Yep. Of another potential. What about an individual within the commune develops some sort of amazing technology that changes the world, and he doesn't want to share it with the community. He does it all for himself, and he decides he wants to sell things online or something, and is shipping stuff out of your country into other countries and bringing money in. How do you deal with that?
Well, I don't think there would be the option to like ship things out to other countries. The whole point is everybody's equal within this environment, and the moment you like let people have money or capitalism or whatever, it spoils it. So we don't. Although it sounds like authoritarian, the only reason that has to happen is to allow the larger system to survive. The same way you would not allow a cold to enter your body or any disease, you have to sort of make a deciding point that no, we cannot allow people to sell things to other countries because it's messing up what our goal is.
So how do you deal with it?
So let's say somebody invents something that is super genius and they don't want to let anybody have it. There's no law that says they have to give it to anybody.
Yeah, what if he starts doing that? Or what if he starts the business, hypothetically?
Well, how would he ship out of the country when...
Maybe he has a boat.
He has his own mechanism.
Yeah.
You know what? That's an interesting dilemma, and I'd have to think about, like, how do you prevent somebody from, like, getting a drone and flying it to, you know, Florida from Cuba and dropping off some magical invention, and then getting, like, money through the internet for that. But what I would say is, as long as that's not spoiling communism, I think it'd be okay. And also, you know, there's no reason why he can't accumulate wealth outside the country. There's no reason why he can't leave the country. So he's welcome to be himself. But he's not welcome to spoil the system.
Yeah. What if you have someone who's spoiling the system? Someone who's going around and preaching capitalism?
You have to, as a collective, make a decision that we do not allow that.
What if he starts spoiling a collective that's of equal size to your current collective?
So you're saying if there's like a divide, half the people are on one side, half the people are on the other. That is another like problem, but you're gonna run into problems when you are truly in an equal opportunity system, because when everybody is given an equal opportunity, there's times where the scales will be perfectly balanced, you know, and nobody has more power than anyone else. So there are things we can do. I'm not a studied Marxist, you know, I can't tell you what Karl Marx would suggest. What I would suggest is using science. Maybe the scientific approach could give us a better idea of who's got a better answer, depending on what the problem is.
Yeah.
And perhaps there should be some sort of a tiebreaker kind of thing set where, you know, if everybody can't agree, then we go through this process and eventually that will lead us to some sort of an answer.
Okay, so last question here. What happens if the population within your country becomes unsustainable?
You mean growing too large or too small?
Too large. Either way, because communism, you need everyone contributing.
Sure. So the too large problem is much easier to address. It's exactly what I was saying before, which is when you have a good accountability for how many people you have now, how many people you're projected to have, you can then make the right calculations. Like, okay, so that means tomorrow we have to build like 12 two-story buildings, 14 60-story buildings to accommodate for all the population that we're going to have. And even though it seems like, well, so what are you going to do? Like put high-rises in every freaking inch of the country so that you can fill it with people? Well, I mean, technology can help us make use of space more efficiently, whether it's growing vegetables vertically or housing people vertically the way we do now. There's so many different solutions. It's up to the great collective of people who will be in that country who are responsible for keeping us moving along smoothly and moving forward. They will be in charge of making those good decisions for us.
What if the population isn't enough?
That's a tough problem because, like, you know, obviously there's sort of a minimum amount of people that you need for this to work. So once it goes below that, it's just not going to work. You have to understand that. So then maybe there's this sort of a certain phase that you can go into under communism where you change the rules a little bit to compensate for the fact that there's not enough members.
Yeah.
Like it could be an anarchist society. I don't know if you're familiar with how anarchists think that their society could work.
I'm a little familiar, but what's your point of view?
It would be essentially like, instead of one large country that functions as a unit,
Yeah.
they would be broken down into villages.
Correct.
So those villages can then self-govern until we're able to collectively organize, and then you have enough people to make the whole larger system function.
Right. Earliest part of humanity is sprung up from that. You went from the beginning was hunter-gatherer societies, and then turned into tribes, and then horticulturalism happened, where coexisting with animals, and then once agriculture hit, boom, civilization. But if you want to develop into communism, I would say the anarchy approach would be the way to do it. Have communities that develop that way. The origin of the United States had communist villages. During the
Communes?
Yeah, they had communes, yes. And some were successful and some were not. Those who weren't had people who took more than their share. Who would be the deciding factor on who gets what share? Would that just be a central person up the top making that decision?
I think this requires a reframing of the question, which is you're assuming that there's some sort of a fair share to be had, but in a situation, a society where everybody has enough to do whatever they want, and they can have the jet ski, and then when they're done with it, they don't have to bring it back to their garage and stuff it into the garage. They can just give it back so that the next person can have it.
Food. Food is the primary thing I'm talking. Food and water.
So you have to sort of accept the fact that instead of what we have now, which is a scarcity of items, like we only make 1,000 Ritz crackers and there's 1 million people, so not everybody can have that. Well, in this society that I'm hypothesizing, there's not a scarcity, rather an abundance. So any food you want, you can have it. We've put a system in place to calculate what foods people will need, and we generate them, and as people are eating more of one thing, we account for that, we make more of that thing. And if there happens to be a day where you can't get, that lovely Ritz cracker that you love, you will get it tomorrow, because as soon as we realize, we're running out, we'll build a better system to make sure we never run out again.
Yeah, so I think that works if you have a machine, you push a button, and food comes out. Yeah, that'll end world hunger right there. If you had a machine like that, that solves that problem. However, there's always a scarcity even if you have an abundance. A scarcity, a lot of people perceive it as a small amount, which is true, but an abundance is not eternal. And if your goal is to create a country which is sustainable for potentially the rest of the existence of humanity, there would need to be some sort of technology that guaranteed food.
And there would be.
Well, I really hope that exists, because we do need, as we talked about in the last video, we do need to address our issues with food production.
Certainly.
Can't go on forever. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just a quick thing, which is I know I can sense there's a lot of people in the audience who are like, well, yeah, what's up with that, man? We don't have the machines to make this all work. What kind of hypothetical thing are you trying to dream up here? That's not realistic. The truth is that we have more than enough resources, both intellectual resources and physical, items, minerals, rocks, coal, all that stuff. We have enough of that in this world to do all the things we want to do. It's just a matter of working on it. So if we take a look at the example of like during World War II, we set our minds on making the atomic bomb. We knew hypothetically it was possible, then we went about creating it. We can do the same thing again with something that's not designed to kill people, but rather help people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is definitely a lot of untapped intellectual potential in every country, and we see the greatest growth in humanity when they have to answer some sort of giant catastrophe, like World War II, great example. The Russians were down and out, and then they rebuilt their entire civilization within 10 years. United States, built their entire infrastructure in 1 decade following World War II. But yeah, I do think there is that untapped potential, and I almost feel like there's almost like a different way of thinking, like you've alluded to in these videos, that we have yet to really reach. And I feel like with the internet being involved in our society, and discussions like this happening all over, that we will eventually reach that next level of understanding of what that potential even is. And maybe it's not your perfect society, maybe it's not my perfect society, but I do think that in order to reach these next levels of consciousness, we have to keep pursuing them. And not only by talking about things, but also listening to things. There's a lot of like name calling happening on both sides right now. I think the biggest thing we can take from these two videos is it's not this and this, it's this. Like, humanity is just one big thing.
That's right. And I think I totally agree. Thank you for saying that. Our only way forward is to work together. Donald Trump isn't going to save anybody, and killing him or getting him out of office isn't going to do anything. We have to realize that we're all in this together, and then it's quite obvious that we have way more power than the people that are oppressing us right now.
Yeah, definitely. So a bare minimum, vote and start getting involved, even if it's not the governmental level, involved at the local level, help with people who are in need, and whatever way you see fit. And trust us, you will not achieve happiness through money, and you will only do that through changing lives and others in the world around us. Closing statement, I'll give it to you.
Sure. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will say that I think we all have way more potential than we realize. So, if I was in your shoes, I would go out and try to reach that potential.
Sweet. Reach that potential. Victor, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Tyler.
It was a good time, and catch you guys on the next one. Bye.